Hey guys, we are back updating the Power Rankings for Survivor UK following the second week of episodes. And I thought this was a step up from the first week, where I feel like a lot of the first week was me getting used to the format and the presentation style. However, I feel like now we are kind of getting more into the groove of things, so there's still plenty of things to talk about. But there are 16 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 16, we have the boot from this week, and here we have Rach. And Rach was pretty quiet for the most part, where from early on it was established that they were at the bottom along with Ashley, and through that, they obviously talked about self-preservation, and there was some setup to their potentially being a Lee downfall here, though I feel like that was ultimately thwarted when Christopher got that confessional talking about needing to stick by Lee for now, which made it clear that it was going to be one of these two. And I feel like between the two, Rach got the least amount of content. I feel like she was the least developed, and through that she was taken out here. And again, on the whole, I feel like her game wasn't really too much, where she did get votes at that first tribal, so she was already kind of looked at as a target, and then obviously she was taken out here, sort of on the outs. So there's not too much to say here, plus I never really felt like she had much of a chance based off her edit, which is why she's here number 16. And with that, there are 15 players left in again to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win based off their edit and current game position. But at number 15, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on is Rachel. And I feel like Rachel, on the whole, has gotten one of the smallest edits out here. And I feel like this week was more the same, where she didn't really get much in episode 3. And then episode 4, she only gets a confessional talking about wanting to win the reward challenge. Again, very baseline stuff here. I feel like I'm not too sure where she really stands on her tribe at this point, which is a pretty big problem considering I feel like other people have way more to go off of based off their edits. I feel like there's not much there for Rachel, which is why she's here number 15. Now moving on to number 14, and with someone who got quite a lot of content over this week, but here we have Lee. And I feel like at this point, there's no way that Lee is winning. I feel like he is such a major antagonistic figure at this point, with him focusing on challenge strength. And I feel like it's already clear that a downfall is coming relatively soon, where we hear people like Christopher talking about how they're just letting Lee take charge for now until eventually they're probably going to turn on him. And I feel like a lot of his talk about wanting to target the women and sticking by the men, a lot of it's being presented in a pretty negative light here. And while he does get his way in terms of targeting Rach and Ashley, he doesn't even vote correctly in that he votes for Ashley due to her injury, while Rach is the one getting most of the votes here. So even then, he's not even getting his way on the actual votes. And I feel like he is being dunked on quite a bit to where he's probably not going to win. He's probably going to be taken out soon, which is why he's here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and we have someone who is still getting a mostly negative edit. However, I feel like there's at least some upside to them, and here we have Shai. And I'm a bit disappointed in Shai again. Doesn't really get much content in episode 3. And in episode 4, we see him continuing to struggle on his tribe, where people are talking about being annoyed by him and that he's way too serious and that they have a hard time connecting with him. All that's pretty bad, and Shai himself doesn't get too much here, but he still gets a confessional in episode 4 talking about how his social game is his biggest worry and that it'll take a while for him to warm up to people, which is part of the reason why he's above these other people, is that I can see a world where he can have this turnaround at some point, and that while he's not getting too much content now, it's possible they could get more content later. But again, it's still a mostly negative edit, and while it's possible he could have this upturn, I'm not entirely sure if that's the style that UK will be going for here, which is why he's here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and really this person's just low due to their current position on their tribe, which isn't great, but here we have Ashley. And I feel like Ashley got some decent content here, like where she talks about Lee like being too domineering, how he's making it feel like a boys club. She talks about being on the bottom and that she doesn't trust Lee and that she's worried that her and Rach will be the targets here. And she doesn't really get too much propping up here for her decision to save herself, mainly due to it being a relatively close vote and her having to turn on her closest ally in Rach, which isn't particularly good. And then in episode 4 today, it's a bit more content, but nothing too fancy here. I feel like she's still going to be in a not great position for now, though considering her connections to people like Christopher, I do feel like he'll probably turn around at some point, though I feel like the edit doesn't do more to prop her up, which is why she's here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have someone who definitely got a better episode this week, though I still feel like their first two episodes were relatively mediocre, and here we have Matthew. And again, I feel like Matthew's edit is kind of a weird one, where in episode 3 he doesn't really get much of anything, but really it's in episode 4 where we get a proper introduction to him. He gets his intro package, talking about how he works a lot of jobs, and that he's a jack of all trades and a master of none, and that people underestimate him due to his age. And again, I feel like that's relatively good. But outside of that, like the fact that he only gets this in episode 4 and before that he gets almost nothing is a pretty big knock in my eyes. Now, the reason I have him above Ashley is that I feel like he's currently in a stronger game position to where I don't really see him going out anytime soon. Whereas I feel like Ashley is still someone on the outs, at least for now. But I feel like it's for all those reasons that I can't have Matthew too high, as his edit just isn't really there as much as I would like, which is why he's here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have someone who definitely got a decent amount of screen time here, though it's definitely debatable how circumstantial it was, and here we have Lawrence. And I feel like Lawrence's content was mostly circumstantial, where he's obviously chosen to go on the reward challenge, where that ultimately results in him and Ren having to choose to get their idols. And obviously, Lawrence get to talk about how he likes to be seen as bright and wacky, and he likes to fool people, and he hopes to be prove them right, sort of tying into what he said preseason about wanting to be the village idiot. Like, he does talk about a strategy about how he wanted to choose the big fish, and that later he comes clean by telling Tanuk about his idol clue there. But again, I feel like a lot of it's circumstantial. A lot of his content is really tied around his idol, which I feel like is not particularly great. Though it's that little nugget about him wanting to prove people right about him being dumb to make people underestimate him, that was enough to have him at least here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and I feel like this person had a decent bounce back to a degree, though I still don't see them as a top contender, and here we have Hannah. I feel like Hannah got some decent strategic content here, where again, she's still in a good spot. She talks about how it'd be nice for the woman to be strong going forward, but it's important for her to be on the right side of the vote. You know, like, and then later on, we see her like sort of play in the middle where she feels tight with the men, but you know, like she also wants to shore up her bonds with the other women to ensure that she has numbers there. Again, it's mostly solid. I do feel like it's still a bit one note compared to others, and I feel like she's probably not the main character right now, which is why I have her here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and I actually considered dropping this person further. However, I still expect this person to be a relatively major character on the season, and here we have Peg Leg. And I feel like from a pure gain standpoint, I feel like Peg Leg's not in the best spot, where he once again votes in the minority. He votes to take out Ashley in a spot where Rach has the majority there, which isn't particularly great. But even beyond that, we see like him and Doug looking for idols, only for Doug to be the one to ultimately find it, which isn't great. He talks about how the women are tight, so he wants to ensure that the guys get the idol. He's sort of being pegged as being part of the men's group, which isn't particularly great. I feel like he'll probably stick with the Lee side once that group flips, which isn't particularly great. But again, I still feel like he's still someone who'll be around for a bit, and I feel like he'll definitely be a bigger character on the season, though I don't really see him winning by the end of it, which is why he's here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and this person got a pretty big visibility spike this week, though how much of that was circumstantial, it's unclear. But here we have Ren, and I kind of regret putting Ren at the bottom of last week's ranking, though I feel like it was kind of justified considering how little screen time they got. But obviously they got quite the spike here, where first up they got their intro package where Ren talks about being non-binary, which is kind of weird considering they didn't put that in their bio, but whatever. They feel like Survivor has things that they're good at, like puzzles, obstacle courses, socializing with people, and being in the outdoors. Again, a lot of good stuff there. Later on, they are obviously picked to go on the reward that leads to them picking their idol. And obviously, they get a decent amount of content there, having to lie to their friends and then sharing the clue with Doug due to Doug being perceived as playing a straightforward game. We get a good glimpse into Ren's relationships here. Again, all in the whole, episode 3 was pretty good for them. Episode 4 didn't give us that much, so we still got a check-in from Ren. So I feel like Ren is starting to emerge more as a big character here, and I feel like they will probably be one of the more level-headed players, if you ask me. Though it's their lack of a premiere and really their first week being that bad that I can't have them too much higher than this spot, though I do acknowledge this was a better week for them, which is why they're here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have someone that's kind of the opposite of Ren in that they had a solid first week, though their second week has kind of dropped off. And here we have Nathan. And I feel like Nathan definitely took a dip in terms of visibility here, doesn't get too much in episode 3, just gives some general stuff about the mood being positive around camp and there being confidence. In episode 4, like he talks about how Leilani hasn't had a chance to shine challenges and that as long as they keep winning, she'll be fine. But obviously that leads in them losing the challenge, and we get the tribal where Leilani is a prime target there until it turns out we get the non-elimination twist, which in turn causes Leilani to be sent over to the other tribe. So in a lot of ways, like, it's pretty middling content here. You can even argue that it could undercut Nathan later on, as we could possibly see Leilani go over to the other tribe and potentially like prove herself there to Nathan's detriment there. So again, I'm not feeling as good about Nathan as I did in week 1, though I still feel like he's in the top half of the contenders based off his overall edit, which is why he's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone who I literally just mentioned, and here we have Leilani. And again, Leilani has continued to get solid content here, a lot of it focusing on her being the physically weakest on her tribe, and that she wants to prove herself and that she can't fit in socially. Again, sort of similar to what you expect from her from the preseason. But in episode 4, she gets her intro package about how she does yoga and that she wants to prove to the older woman that being older is just a beginning. Again, like, pretty good stuff there, but she's still a pretty prime target coming into Tribal, only for it to be a non-elimination round, and at that point it made sense that she would be sent over there. Now, I do question whether she herself would have been the boot had it been a normal round, where obviously we got plenty of talk of people not trusting Shai too much, though obviously once the twist was revealed, it just made sense for Leilani to be sent over, due to her being seemingly more trustworthy than Shai, and more likely to stick by the original tribe, though we'll have to see how that plays out. So I still feel like she's probably going to be a bigger character on the season, though there's still some questionable stuff with her current game position, which is why she's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have someone kind of similar to Leilani, but they're in a slightly better position game-wise, and here we have Jess. Now, Jess doesn't seem to be in as much danger as Leilani, as Shai still seems to be a pretty prime target if they go to Tribal soon, but she's still getting decent content. Like, she seems to be a pretty fun character. She talks about how it's good if Lawrence took the food for the tribe, or if she's lying about the idol. She does suspect that Lawrence could have taken the idol, which is something there. She's the only one to really suspect that. And then episode 4, she gets some content, pretty generic content to be honest, but she's still getting a relatively consistent presence across the season. I feel like she's probably someone that could be a major character as well, and that's part of the reason why I have her this high, though I feel like the top contenders are pretty solidified in my view, which is why she's here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and for me these are the clear top contenders right now. By number 3, I did decide to go with Tanuk, and I feel like this was, again, another mostly consistent week for Tanuk here, where she's not a major presence, but she's still getting plenty of content. She gets a comment about Lawrence being naked, which ties into him like wanting to show people that he's like really wacky and stuff. Episode 4, like, she gets a tongue a bit on Shai for not being a very good player and that he's way too serious and not a team player. She obviously is the one that Lawrence chooses to tell about his idol clue, which is pretty good. And obviously that leads in her like being in a pretty solid spot on her tribe. I feel like she is definitely in one of the better positions on her tribe, which is a big reason why I have her this high. She's pretty much in the center of things right now alongside Nathan. However, I feel like the top 2 seem to be more propped up in the edit, as well as having seemingly similar good game positions, which is why I have her here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and I feel like this person is essentially in the best position in the game right now, or at least on their respective tribe, and we've definitely gotten to see that quite a bit, though I feel like I still sense that they could be a decoy winner. But number 2, I do have a Doug, and I feel like Doug is essentially in the center of his tribe right now, like where we get plenty of his perspective across the episode. He's obviously the one that Ren chooses to tell about their idol glue, which is pretty good, and that leads into them finding the idol, which is pretty good there. He gets to talk about how, like, Lee has this very simple mindset about how it's the weakest in challenges that needs to go. He sort of gets to be the one to dunk on Lee there, which is pretty good, sort of setting up like his role if Lee were to be eventually like taken out there. He's obviously playing the middle where he's obviously with the guys, but also someone that has very solid relationships with a lot of the women, namely in Ren and Ashley. And we get to see those relationships highlighted on the show. Episode 4, like he gets more stuff there. Again, finds the idol there. He feels like he can trust Ren, shares it with Ren. And in general, he seems to be one of the main focus points on his tribe right now, which is pretty good. So I feel like Doug is really being shown to be like one of the better position players in the game. I feel like he's someone who, if I'm basing it purely off game position, I feel like he'll probably be number 1. But I still have the sense that he could eventually just be this decoy winner, someone that's getting a lot of content now, that was eventually taken out down the road, which is why I do have him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor UK right now is Christopher. And I'm feeling very solid about Christopher after this batch of episodes. I feel like alongside Doug, he is in one of the better positions on his tribe right now, where again, he has plenty of relationships with both the guys as well as plenty of the women there. He gets plenty of narrational content talking about how, like it could be fishy that Ren could be lying about taking fish versus keeping an idol, though he doesn't necessarily say that as much. He is again talking about how Lee's at the forefront of things, sort of setting up that if things were to turn at some point, that he would be responsible for it, and even gets that confessional before Tribal about how the men are a tight alliance and that he needs to coast along for now, which leads into his intro package about how he's always a performer and that he can turn things on and off and that he's a smooth operator. Again, I feel like he's sort of similar to Doug in that he's in a solid game position and is still someone getting plenty of content to where he is essentially the main character of the season. However, I feel like Doug is seemingly someone that's more likely to be a threat down the road, whereas I feel like Christopher is someone that can sort of skate on by for a bit more while still being in a solid position and still getting good content, which is why I did decide to give the edge to Christopher over Doug, though I feel like they're relatively close in my eyes. But for this week, I do have Christopher here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps out with the channel. I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can stay tuned for that. I'm covering Survivor 45 as well as The Amazing Race 35, so you can expect weekly power rankings of those shows. I am now on Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And if you haven't already, you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.